But I did like some research on the Texas thing.
Describe the Texas thing so people know what we're talking about.
Hey, it's Sue here. I actually read the text of the 2 letters and some of the Attorney General's opinion, but since I was recording in my laundry room, the sound got a little screwed up and I don't really know how to read anyway, so I bribed a random 13-year-old with some candy corn to do it for me. Enjoy.
Dear Commissioner Masters, consistent with our correspondence in August 2021, the Office of the Attorney General has now confirmed in the enclosed opinion that a number of so-called sex change procedures constitute child abuse under existing Texas law. Because the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services is responsible for protecting children from abuse, I hereby direct your agency to conduct a prompt and thorough investigation of any reported instances of these abusive procedures in the state of Texas. As OAG Opinion Number KP-0401 makes clear, it is already against the law to subject Texas children to a wide variety of elective procedures for gender transitioning, including reassignment surgeries that can cause sterilization, mastectomies, removals of otherwise healthy body parts, and administration of puberty-blocking drugs or supraphysiologic doses of testosterone or estrogen. Texas law imposes reporting requirements upon all licensed professionals who have direct contact with children who may be subject to such abuse, including doctors, nurses, and teachers, and provides criminal penalties for failure to report such child abuse. There are similar reporting requirements and criminal penalties for members of the general public. Texas law also imposes a duty on DFPS to investigate the parents of a child who is subjected to these abusive gender transitioning procedures, and on other state agencies to investigate licensed facilities where such procedures may occur. To protect Texas children from abuse, DFPS and all other state agencies must follow the law as explained in OAG Opinion Number KP-0401. Sincerely, Greg Abbott, Governor.
It wasn't a law.
I just cannot get my mind around how people are this misguided.
Hold on.
Are there people who think that children are born in the wrong body, firstly? And how are there people who think that it's medical care to perform mastectomies and castrations on children?
Hold on. So they added, okay. We will not allow...
I can't do it. You're more than happy to accuse Republicans of making a political issue of this, which they are. They love this, but it's Democrats who are allowing them to make this a political issue. Because if Democrats would plug their brains in, they would understand that no, it's not medical care to castrate boys. Under the age of 18, they're still legally children. It's not okay to castrate them. And you can call it gender affirming.
But they're going to kill themselves.
But you're talking about castrating boys. You're talking about with girls removing healthy breasts. You're talking
Look, it's
about
castration or kill themselves, okay?
It's disturbing.
Those are the only 2 choices.
They're not lying about
this. And if my child was suicidal and said the only way I will not kill myself is if you allow me to have my penis removed and my testicles removed, I would say no. That
you need to section them. If they're really getting the knife out.
Mental health care, but I'm not letting
them in a mental hospital, don't you?
They
need treatment. If they're literally, grabbing the knife.
Obviously, yeah. No, they should be there's psychiatric facilities for people who are imminently suicidal.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
that's what
there's no evidence whatsoever to suggest that sex change operations make children less suicidal. I mean, we all have genitals. There are none of us born without genitals. And we've all felt suicidal, right? How suicidal would you be if somebody cut off your genitals? Think about this. I can't understand how any adult with any level of education thinks that this is a real thing. I understand the point about, Republicans are just targeting. Okay, that's fine. But if there are literally people who want to castrate their children, which there are, Susie Green, then we ought to all be able to get on the same page and be against that.
If someone from a right-wing party said, "Oh, well, I think murder's terrible," what are the left wing going to say? "Oh, well, we think it's justified sometimes."
Right.
Is that what they're going to do?
There are people that'll do that too.
Interestingly, I actually know somebody in Texas who's a parent who has a child. I believe his daughter was 15 when she got a double mastectomy. What the way that he described it was that it was going to make it child abuse, and it was going to make it a criminal offense.
Hey, Sue again. What Naya is talking about here is Texas Senate Bill 1646, which amended the existing Texas child abuse statute to include these transgender medical procedures. I threw the text up here if you want to check it out. It passed in the Texas Senate with an 18-12 vote and was then referred to the Texas House Public Health Committee, where it's been sitting since April 2021. So,
but I'm talking legally, so I'm talking like that.
But legally, it is.
Right.
And the Attorney General came out and issued an opinion clarifying, as if it needed to be clarified, but clarifying that this is the existing law.
1. Executive summary. Based on the analysis herein, each of the sex change procedures and treatments enumerated above, when performed on children, can legally constitute child abuse under several provisions of Chapter 261 of the Texas Family Code. These procedures and treatments can cause mental or emotional injury to a child that results in an observable and material impairment in a child's growth, development, or psychological functioning. Texas Family Code Section 261.001 subsection 1A. These procedures and treatments can cause or permit the child to be in a situation in which the child sustains a mental or emotional injury that results in an observable and material impairment in the child's growth, development, or physiological functioning. ID Section 261.001 subsection 1B. These procedures and treatments can cause a physical injury that results in substantial harm to the child. ID Section 261.0011 subsection 1C. These procedures and treatments often involve a failure to make a reasonable effort to prevent an action by another person that results in physical injury that results in substantial harm to the child, particularly by parents, counselors, and physicians. ID Section 261.001 subsection 1D. In addition to analysis under the Family Code, we discuss below the fundamental right to procreation, issues of physical and emotional harm associated with these procedures and treatments, consent laws in Texas and throughout the country, and existing child abuse standards. Each of the procedures and treatments you ask about can constitute child abuse when performed on minor children.
Every state in the United States already has a law.
The AG actually went through reasoning for why the stuff was considered child abuse. And so the governor kind of discussed that opinion, and he issued this extra order to prosecutors to say, hey, we want you to look into these agencies. And then these prosecutors pushed back. So.
Texas District Attorneys condemn Abbott and Paxton's anti-trans and life-threatening directives. We are deeply disturbed by Governor Abbott and Attorney General Paxton's cruel directives treating transgender children's access to life-saving, gender-affirming care as child abuse. This is part of a continued onslaught on personal freedoms. Elected officials should be protecting our most vulnerable. These two instead want to irrationally target and restrain children seeking medical assistance and force caregivers to participate. This is un-American. We cannot stand silent in the face of such an egregious invasion of privacy. We also want to be clear. We will enforce the Constitution and will not irrationally and unjustifiably interfere with medical decisions made between children, their parents, and their medical physicians. We trust the judgment of our state's medical professionals who dedicate themselves to providing the highest degree of care not only for our transgender youth, but for all youth in our communities. We want to assure our residents with transgender children that they are safe to continue seeking the care their children need. We will not allow the governor and attorney general to disregard Texan children's lives in order to score political points. We have a choice. We can launch politically motivated attacks, or we can lift up and protect communities. We are proud to do the latter. John Creswit, Dallas County District Attorney. Jose Gazzara, Travis County District Attorney. Joe Gonzalez, Bexar County District Attorney. Mark Gonzalez, Nueces County District Attorney. Brian Middleton, Fort Bend County District Attorney.
Anastasia was kind of saying, like, how could you possibly think that's a good idea? You know, like, how could anybody think that's a good idea to do that to their children? And I do just want to speak to, like, how powerful the narrative is. Like, painting this as something that is the only option, the best option, a certain type of people that were born. The dad initially was, like, very uncomfortable with it. Like, I mean, the girl had been identifying in this way for a long time. All of her friends are, like, all of her friends are, like, in the trans queer group. Just to start off with, like, he's a person who's, like, very opposed to unnecessary medical care, or, very skeptical of surgeries to begin with. So one would wonder, you have somebody who's already very naturally inclined. You have somebody who's also a little bit conservative, like, is the impression that I got, just in general when it comes to LGBT stuff. And to get him to the point that he was essentially willing to back it up, and then just even hearing the way that he talks about it. I mean, he's also somebody who very much understands what sex is. And, so it really puts him in this cognitive dissonance, which I've kind of observed from a distance, and it's quite interesting to see. Because I think, I mean, to really have such an understanding of the actual sex differences, the actual differences with the sexes, having an understanding that, unnecessary surgeries, cause all this iatrogenic harm, and yet essentially at the end of the day supporting it and being like, well, my son is, so much more comfortable in his body. I'm just trying to speak to the power of, like, the social pressure, and the narrative that this is something that's harmless, that this is something that's helpful, and to, and to just, like, in a way, like, while I appreciate the fact that, there's some state that's cracking down on this a little bit, at the same time, I have a lot of empathy for that. Like, I've just, I didn't want to do this, but I was really convinced to do this. My kid's really happy, my kid's much happier now. Mm-hmm. And, I'm part of this whole community of parents who have these trans kids or whatever. And now suddenly it's being classified as child abuse, like saying I'm abusing my child. Like, I've tried to do everything right. And, like, I'm seeing these other parents, they're trying to do everything right. And, like, now we're going to, like, people are going to, like, face criminal charges. And, like, it is like, I mean, I don't really know what the implementation is going to be, but it is quite, like, shocking.
Like, so many people are getting caught in the wheels of this machine, that it, like, the gears of this machine, and getting ground up. And it's like, so many of them are well-meaning, some of them are not. Mm-hmm. but it's like it has to, it isn't an argument against the action or the bill necessarily, just because like you have to crack some eggs to make an omelet type of a thing. Like in order to change something like this, a lot of people have to come to terms with the fact that they did serious, grievous harm and wake up to that. The flip side is that there is this like, is there a better way to go about this? Like, is there another way to change? I genuinely don't know. It's just an open-ended, how does one bring about this type of reverse something so heinously wrong without hurting so many people? I don't know if it can be done.
I think
if there is a better way to do it, I don't know what it is.
This heinous without there's going to be more pain. But let me try to add some clarity to my frustration. I'm not frustrated with the parents, but by and large, every parent is struggling, and a parent of a teen especially is struggling to try to figure out what's the best thing to do for their kid from day to day. And so, I know parents who have kids that are identifying as transgender, and it's extremely difficult. My frustration is not with them. My frustration is with, doctors and the medical community. It's with the licensing boards of doctors whose responsibility is to make sure that doctors are treating patients appropriately. And my frustration is extremely, extremely high with political figures on the Democratic side who won't engage with this, who won't engage their brains enough with this to see that it is a problem. It's not, it is, there's definitely some hate and some bigotry and some BS. That's not what this is about, though. And one of the things that really concerns me, especially in Texas, and I'm thinking about that young man who goes by Kai, his mom literally said multiple times, I was afraid I had a gay son, and we're evangelical, and having a gay son is not okay. And people are asking me, your son's very effeminate. Is he going to be gay? And firstly, I don't think it's ever appropriate, no matter how a child acts, to be speculating about their sexual orientation. But that mom found a way to conversion this child. She literally says, I Googled conversion therapy. And what I found was, oh, maybe your child is transgender. And it was much more acceptable to her and acceptable to church and community to turn this little effeminate boy into a girl.
I was outdoors last summer in a conservative part of a relatively conservative part of the country. Like, it was a somewhat major city, but it was definitely a place where they still giggle about gay, like, oh, they're gay, ha ha ha. Like it's still, like, they're still very uncomfortable with the concept of people being gay. And that's like I saw two men walking down the street holding hands, and one of them was, like, trying to pass as a woman, like trans. And I pointed it out to the person I was eating with, and she was like, oh, I didn't notice. It's like, that's exactly the point. That's why they're doing it. Because if you had two men walking down the street, you would have holding hands, you would have noticed that. It would have been something that, like, would have stood out in that city because they're still uncomfortable with people being gay there. And so it's like that just points to this overall, like, in these, they are more comfortable with it because they don't notice it as much. It doesn't affront their sensibilities. And that, I think, is just a very clear example of it to me, of how it manifests, how you might have, this clearly wasn't autogynephilia, it was clearly like homosexual, transsexual situation, but they just become more comfortable with people, like getting breast implants.
Seeing what has happened to Jazz, I think it needs to alert us, and that needs to be where we draw the line. We know what happens. So Kai is still a kid. I think maybe 8, 9, 10, maybe. Little boys are adorable. You can grow their hair out and put them in dresses, and they are adorable. But the fact that little boys can be made to look like little girls does not mean that they are girls. And it doesn't mean that there's something in their brain that somehow makes them girls. They are still boys. And once they reach puberty, all bets are off, man. Because you cannot keep that child in that state of childhoodness forever. Jazz has had some extremely serious trauma done to him, trying to preserve him looking very feminine, which ultimately is a not successful, and B is the reason that his mom has turned against him.
Didn't like a study or some sort of research find that a lot of kids who suffered from dysphoria later they lost the dysphoria and they
assistance
and they ended up
the majority
ended up being
There's like a big picture thing that I think is going on with both, like having a gay child or a daughter who's dealing with misogyny and internalized misogyny. And it's like, I have said this, I had this realization about women shaving a few years ago. And it was that women in the West, we don't have to shave as long as we cover up the areas that we would shave. So it's a kind of veiling thing, right? Like we hate this part of you, we hate it, and you can keep it as long as you cover it up. But if you don't cover it up, you have to remove it. It's the same thing with breasts. It's like you have to cover up your breasts unless you cut them off, and then you don't have to cover them up anymore, which is way more barbaric. Your hair will grow back, your breasts will not, regardless of what some doctors claim online. And then the thing, like, there's a related type of thing going on with the child being gay, where it's like you can be gay as long as we cover it up. Like, you can be a boy who loves boys as long as we make it seem like you're a girl who loves boys.
There's sort of a hierarchy as well of what is acceptable in patriarchy, or what is more acceptable than other things. So ideally, you have, husband and wife, heterosexual, relationship. That's perfectly fine with patriarchy. But if you have a gay couple, as long as they're living in the suburbs and quiet and not having pool parties, and I think and that's where I think a lot of times people are almost more uncomfortable with a straight couple that you can't tell who's the man in the relationship and who's the woman than they are with a gay couple where it's very obvious who wears the pants. And people ask all these silly questions like, two lesbians getting married, well, which one of you is the man? Well, that's not the way that works, but that's what patriarchy brain wants us to ask for. Anytime we talk about gender ideology and transgender, we have to really think about that's not the same thing. You talked about how overwhelming it is for parents and how strong that narrative is. And I think that narrative is able to be that strong because it's the unholy trinity of effeminate boys and their homophobic parents, young women struggling with internalized misogyny and, struggling with puberty. So it's those two. And the third piece, the unholy spirit, is AGP males.
So I was in a super liberal enclave, some might say the ground zero of this trans thing, about a decade or so ago, and I was at a party, and or a gathering rather, and there was an obviously AGP autogynephilic trans-identifying male there, so like claiming to be a woman, and they were saying they were basically arguing to me and to other people at the time, and I was too far removed from it then to realize there was this whole issue, and I was just finding out that this was a thing. And they were basically arguing on behalf of child transition and giving puberty blockers to children and hormones and stuff. And they were saying my life would be easier if I had gone through that. And the problem with that is that
good for you.
They didn't. I know, right? But you can't turn back time. They literally don't know that. But it was a very clear connection between that sexual tendency.
Oh yeah, they're the ones
and modifying children
for this.
Yeah,
and Marcy Bowers is a prime example. That's one of the doctors who operated on Jazz. They're living out a fantasy that they have, that if only they'd had some, intervention to prevent their secondary sex characteristics from developing in puberty, that they would pass. And that's the goal, is to be able to pass.
I was just comparing it in my mind to when a parent misguidedly lives out the life they should have had in their mind on the child, like tries to get the child to live what should have been their life. Say you wanted to be an actress, you didn't make it, to push your child into acting at every opportunity. And there's some parents like that, and these adult autogynephiles are maybe doing that with some of a whole host of children.
AGP is kind of its own thing. And the other thing is that AGP is also a spectrum. So I even saw some paper on like the she-male dynamic, which is like they don't want to be fully a woman, but they want to be like in between. They want like aspects of the womanhood, but they don't want to like fully 100% be. So what I've seen in some of these individuals, in fact, quite a few, which is slightly alarming, is both like, I think I might actually be a woman. I'm really revolted by my masculine features. And, also, like I get really turned on when I put on women's clothing.
The unholy trinity that you mentioned, Anastasia, I think is a really good way of framing it, because there really is, there is also a connection here to the homophobia, where you have, like, Naya and I were talking about this in a separate conversation, but there is a kind of like taboo disgust of male genitalia and certain male features, because there is this like men dominate the media, they dominate society. They don't want to see penis. They don't want to see, like the things that are appealing about the male body. So that becomes taboo, pushed to the side, reviled. If you're a woman and you hate being exposed to that objectification, you get the internalized misogyny and you want to not be that. If you're a boy and you're exposed to that, it really amplifies that dynamic of disgust with your own body.
To me, and this is like a personal gripe that I have, and that is that in a lot of the gender critical world, there is a lot of very justified criticism for essentially the whole trans phenomenon, and the idea of doing this to children, and kind of the whole belief system and structure and everything. But one thing that I typically don't see from a lot of people is an alternative.
Right.
Like, you have people who have real issues, real suffering. I know some people don't like the religion word, but it's a religion and a disability, or like a mental illness. And I think the problem is, like, first of all, we have to separate these, like, what we call the religious or the cult elements. We have to separate these, like, mystical beliefs around them from the mental illness itself. But if we're doing things like this, especially when it comes to these people, like, who are just the parents who are just trying to help their children, like, there needs to be, like, the effort needs to be in what is the alternative path. Because if we just rob this of, we rob people of something that, whether it be like a placebo, just fully placebo effect, which, these surgeries pretty much are, but, if we just rob them of the tools, the crappy tools that they have, essentially, without providing an alternative path, then you're really just leaving them high and dry. And, it's like, that's extremely shitty.
Right.
And I think that, like, that's going to cause people to shut down. That's going to cause people to think we are totally unreasonable.
Yeah.
And, and like, one of the most interesting, it was like on this tiny little radfem blog, but one of the most interesting pieces of research I personally have seen on gender dysphoria and trans people was, and maybe I can link it in the description or something, but it was a paper that was showing that the differences in trans brains were in the regions that were responsible for body mapping, body ownership. So, like, there's, so, like, if you take away the gender stuff, you take away the ideologies, you take away the ideas, at the end of the day, if what is physically going on is that you have a region of your body that's supposed to say, this is my arm, like the body integrity thing, or like, this is whatever, and it's telling you this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. I mean, that's hugely affronting. Like, that's like a hugely disruptive, and potentially there are therapies, there are ways that could realign that with what your body actually is without having to
That's
make these
interesting. That's an interesting idea. Of course, it raises, cause and effect. I think it's called proprioception, isn't it? I mean, did they have a proprioception problem that caused it, or did the trans thing cause them to have a problem with proprioception?
I think that the mismatch would be more interoceptive. So proprioception is like, yeah, it's your limbs in space, like your body in space. Interoception is like your own perception of what's internal to your body. So I think the mismatch is probably more there. I think that the types of therapies are going to have to be like actual types of therapies that are more targeted. Like, maybe it's different of somatic therapies. I know that the interoception researchers who are going right now are looking at other types of interventions, different training ways to train and reconnect. And I mean, I think there's like there's room for so much innovation and creativity.
Sorry
there.
about my dog.
But I just think we have to be looking at that, like, we have to be considering that, and like, have our brains in the right spot, in pointing in the right direction for that creativity to sort of surface. We have to be doing the research, and we have to have our, like, our eyes and minds on that prize, because I mean, but there is, like, gender dysphoria, sex dysphoria, like, there's quite a range of presentations, and there's quite a range of how it can happen and what can cause it. And we have to really break it down and look really critically at it. And, and I think that if we do that, I think that, it may be like quite the list of different things for different particularities. But I think that there's a lot that's possible there. And I would really love to see that being more of the focus.
How to deal with, having a sexual orientation that's other than heterosexual needs to be addressed. It's not a simple thing of I've always known, and then one day you just come out, and then from there life is easy. That's not how being gay, lesbian, or bisexual actually is, and there needs to be support for that.
I think there should be a category that's like, there's nothing wrong with you, but you're in a place where you need specific support from society because you don't fit like the big picture normal whatever that everybody else is dealing like neuroatypical, like that's the equivalent of what has evolved in the like the space of the autism spectrum. There's nothing wrong with the person, they just can't make it in school with all of the other like the mainstream whatever. So it's not like there's something wrong with their brain, it's like it's just they're just responding in a way that's different to what their classmates are responding.
That's what I noticed, like when people talk about the religion thing, or cults, or I call it a cult, but I don't walk up to somebody and I say like, hey, you know, like I'm mentally ill, you know. I'm not my mental illness. It's just a part of me.
But there are some people who do.
You're right. You know, like it's one of many different things about me. It's not my entire identity.
Probably have a whole hour-long conversation about why some people adopt certain things as part of their identity, and other people may have the same thing and it's, you know, not part of what they adopt as their identity.
Well, like just from my own experience with my career, like I think so the field of engineering is very male dominated, and in the course of trying to like go through the process of getting a career in this field as a woman, all of the schools and support systems and whatever, they're for racial minorities, because women aren't an overall minority. And so this is kind of the thing I was talking about, which is that if you're supporting minorities in pursuit of something, and you put the support behind that, you fail to recognize that somebody who isn't a minority, it still needs support because they're functionally a minority within whatever category. It creates this problem. It's like there should be a way to not classify me as a minority when it comes to being a woman in engineering, but still provide me the same support for getting through this system that really only like gets white men through it. White and Asian men get through engineering, and then everybody else is like severe, like aggressively pushed out of the pipeline. And so that's what I'm saying, is that like when you conceptualize something as just mentally ill versus not mentally ill, as like minority versus not a minority, you miss the situations that are kind of in between the two, where you need the support as if there's a mental illness, but you don't capture people who really don't have a mental illness. Like
I think like part of that, like going back to the Texas thing, I think maybe that's what they're getting at as well. You know, when a kid comes to you and says, I'm dysphoric, you know, the answer is not to say, you know, it's not to suddenly affirm, it's to investigate and see what kind of help can we give this kid.
Right. And
dysphoria is just
reading,
like what they're
I read
saying,
the text,
you know.
Right. And I read when I read the text of the thing from Texas that you had sent, the thing with like I have a friend who's in Texas, and he's like been following all my posts on it and stuff, and he originally, you know, I told him how much there's something like 50 like child pediatric gender clinics in Texas or something, like some huge number. And his thought, where they perform orchiectomies and whatever, and his thought when I sent it to him, like he didn't read it right, because he expected that 50 children in the state of Texas had an orchiectomy, and he was like, what, like couldn't there be a medical reason for it? And I was like, oh, there absolutely are, but these are clinics, and they're not treating ones who have a medical issue. And he was appalled by that. And the reason why I'm bringing that up in this context is that the text specifically said, they mentioned orchiectomies for like testicular cancer in kids, and that not being what the advice was about. But it just goes to show that when people, like, they have to misread it to see it as a problem. They have to misread what's actually going on in order to be to be appalled that the directive is coming down. And so I think that, like, yeah, it's good that they're saying get these kids some other treatment, because I think that when people know what's actually happening, they actually do think that that's the sensible path. They think that that's the right way to go.
I'm just worried that with Democrats so absent on this, that instead of getting them other help, it does just target families with gender non-conforming youth.
Well, why do you think they're absent too?
Well, they've abdicated any responsibility in this in favor of just pushing a euphemistic narrative, which I don't think they even always believe. I think they just see this as a political issue that's not a winning one for them to engage in, and it's only winning for them if they Republicans as their enemies. I think if they weren't trying to score political points on the opposite side of Republicans, maybe they would engage their brains and see that there's a place for them in this discussion. Because what I don't want to happen in Texas or anywhere is for the state to start stepping into families and saying, we're concerned that you're going to abuse your child, and so therefore let us help make sure that they don't become gay. What are the other options? There should be other options. Orchiectomy should not be the thing that we're pursuing. Double mastectomies for young women should not be the thing that we're pursuing. But if both political sides don't engage on this and try to work together and find out, what is and I'm not a middle of the road person. I'm a far left kind of person. But what is the moderate answer to this? Because it's not cutting young girls' breasts off. It's what do we do about this? And just saying, oh, Republicans are wrong because they're, they just don't like trans kids, abdicates responsibility there.
Like, there's a Florida bill that's going through, which we should talk about next. And the one part that has jumped out to me and many other people that's concerning is not talking about sexuality, like same-sex attraction in younger grades, which I think, that does feel like kind of sneaking in an old a very conservative view of relationships and whatever else into an otherwise pretty solid bill that tries to prevent these issues. And that one thing allows the Democrats to be like, you're evil, you're out to get gay people. And I think that you're trying to settle an old score. And I think that's like a strategic flaw of what they did in Florida, because otherwise there would have been nothing they could have pushed back against. But in terms of why Democrats are not there, I've had this realization over the past 2 years that the Democrats are a group of people of which I have always been a member. I've always been a Democrat. And the thing is that they think that there's a morality that is like a scientific morality almost. And it blinds them. They just assume that they're good and the Republicans are bad, and therefore, if I believe in this thing and I support these people, like this kind of,
because science.
It's hard to explain briefly, but it's the fact that you have to, in order to be right about being right, you have to imagine that you might be wrong and explore that. And that's how I ended up where I am. I didn't assume I was right. I think I'm often right, and I'm often right because I consider being wrong. Right. But a lot of people think that you can just decide to be right all the time. Like, you can just decide to be right and then you'll end up right. But that's not how it is. And I think I think that's an excellent point with Democrats, and I think that I don't
don't know with the some of the leadership and a lot of the politicians. I feel more cynical about them, but by and large, and I think I've said this before, I think most people have picked a side on this based on, well, I'm a Democrat, and if Republicans are for this, then I'm against it, and vice versa. They don't, it's confirmation bias, and they don't really think about it too deeply. Like I said, I'm more cynical about a lot of the politicians, and I feel like there's a lot of them that do at least see through this, or don't necessarily agree. And like, I was watching a piece where Beto was asked a question about what are you doing to support non-binary children, whatever. And he didn't say, oh, I support non-binary children. I think that's a real thing. I believe in this. And your parents should be able to give you testosterone. He didn't jump on that bandwagon. What he did was to say Republicans are bad, and Republicans are bad because they're targeting and blah blah blah. He definitely did not jump into I'm pro-trans and I believe in gender ideology, but he simply used it to say Republicans are bad. Mm-hmm. And that's that's what I see from a lot of Democratic politicians is how can I,
so they're not willing to actually speak out on it
in a way that looks good for me.
Like, I haven't been following the politicians as much, but like, I feel like just personally what I see is like a lot of people have cognitive dissonance on this, because there's just always like that part that just doesn't click. You're like, well, sure, they're women, but there's like that cognitive dissonance. So when you're in that place, you don't have enough certainty to be like, yes, this is 100%. So like, you'll just defer to whatever you're like, oh, the Democrats, they're credible, So it's like, well, I don't really know, but I'm aligning with like the convention because I feel like that's a safe like way to go.
There was this journalist, Zerlina Maxwell, who I really liked her insight and her reporting and stuff like that. And she just had an hour-long podcast once a week, or no, every day. So it was like an hour or two. I think it was a 2-hour podcast every day. And she, I was like following all her stuff, and I enjoyed what she was saying and whatever. And she then got a show on TV and started like she took off, her career took off. And I started disagreeing with her all the time. And I realized her life got busy. She stopped being able to look into the stuff on her own, and she started receiving information from other people. And the same realization happened when I called the office of my local representatives, and I was talking to this young woman on the phone who was just completely indoctrinated, and she's a person who gets the information to relay to my representatives. And so it's like the politicians are busy. They're getting their information from these young staffers who are indoctrinated. And so then they're also, there's been issues locally to me as well, where our governor is getting information from the press who absolutely refuses. You contact the press, they refuse to report on these issues, like both with like gender issues or like there was stuff associated with pandemic restrictions, and they would not report on it, story or whatever.
They don't want to alienate their audience, and they don't want to alienate advertisers. It's about being able to sell products. And honestly, there's a ton of companies that are absolutely in love with transgender because it's a whole new marketing thing. I mean, even, Target. And I love Target. I shop at Target all the time. Send me a free
Target's
gift card.
bougie. Target. Wow.
But,
see.
Pride Week, Target, for God's sake, now has like a whole line of shirts and everything. And so they're more than happy if they can sell more t-shirts. They're more than happy to jump on the transgender bandwagon. And it's completely marketing. It has nothing to do with
It's just like
it's just how to sell something else.
You said it's like Halloween.
Yeah.
That's a good.
No,
it's like
absolutely.
Halloween or Valentine's, it's Pride Week, right? I mean, in England, we even Marks and Spencer's, which is quite a good supermarket, a bit more expensive. They made some sort of gay sandwich or something that was rainbows or something.
Well, and that's been a real. We're so off topic, and we so need to rein this in. But that's been a real problem, I think, for the gay, lesbian, and bisexual community. Is we've lost a lot of our community spaces, because if I wanted a t-shirt that said I'm a big fat lesbian, I had to actually go to the gay and lesbian bookstore where there were other gay and lesbian people. And now I can just, online target and never meet another gay or lesbian person.
So the politicians think something is more popular than it actually is. They think that people feel or think a different way. And so I think that what's happening is that both the press and the politicians are really busy. They're getting their information from third parties who haven't vetted all the information, who are indoctrinated. And it's just like information overload is, I think, causing a lot of people to have very misguided opinions. Because when you talk to people one-on-one and you point them in the direction of these things, they come around. There is the cognitive dissonance thing. But most people who haven't engaged in it much, once they start to know, it took me a few hours to pique my mom. It wasn't hard. She wasn't involved in it. She kind of superficially agreed with it. I brought up a set of examples. She's like, "That's wrong. That's wrong. I don't agree with that."
Crap! I gotta pick up my kid.
I think Naya's got to go too. How do people wrap? Oh, when they've been talking for several hours.
Okay, Orch, take us out.
Say, oh, well, it's been a great discussion today, guys.
All right.
Okay,
bye.
There we go.
I'm so happy-go-lucky me. I just go my way, living every day. I don't worrying don't agree. Things that bother you never bother me. Things that bother you never bother me. I'm so happy, I'm fine. Living in the sunlight, loving in the moonlight, having a wonderful time. Haven't got a lot, I don't need a lot. Coffee's only a dime. Living in the sunlight, loving in the moonlight, having a wonderful time. Just take it from me, I'm just as free as any doctor. I do what I like, just when I like, and how I love it. I'm right here to stay when I'm old and grey. I'll be right in my prime. Ha ha! Living in the sunlight, loving in the moonlight, having a wonderful time. Do 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 do.